It was October of 2019. The American Craft Spirits Awards, a hotel ballroom in Denver. Everything smelled like money and oak barrels. A man in a tuxedo stood at the podium. His name was Julian Croft. He was a legend in the industry. The final award of the night, Best Single Barrel Whiskey. He held a small green bottle in his hand. Miller's Reserve, batch number 7. He read from a card. Notes of toasted almond, leather, and vanilla. A remarkably complex finish. A truly singular spirit. Then he paused. He looked down at the card again. He squinted under the bright lights. The room was silent. He tapped the microphone. It says here the primary grain. The mash bill is 90% corn, a heritage variety from the Miller family farm. He paused again, longer this time. It says here, this corn was originally classified as feed grade. He looked up at the audience. That can't be right. Someone must have made a mistake. The room went still. Feed grade corn was for cattle. It was the bottom of the market. It was what you sold when you had nothing else. It wasn't for award-winning whiskey. It was impossible. But there was no mistake. And this is the story of that impossibility. It's a story about the gap between what something is and what someone tells you it's worth. This channel is built on stories just like this one. Stories of people who were told no, who were told they couldn't, who were told their work had no value. If you believe these stories need to be told, click subscribe. Because what happened to Sarah Miller, it's happening to someone right now, and they need to hear this. Let's go back. Not to 2019, but to the summer of 2004. Sarah Miller was 22 years old. She stood in the yard of her family's farm, 120 acres in central Ohio. Her father had died that spring, a heart attack while fixing a fence line. Quick, too quick. The farm was now hers, and so was the debt. A John Deere 7810 tractor with a note, an operating loan from the bank, input costs for seed and fertilizer. The numbers were stark. They were written on a yellow legal pad on the kitchen table. Her father's neat, blocky handwriting. Next to the numbers was a coffee stain, and a single word circled 3 times. Corn. Not just any corn. For 3 generations, the Miller family had grown their own variety. An open-pollinated white dent corn. They just called it Miller corn. It wasn't a modern hybrid. It didn't have the engineered sugar content. It didn't have the uniform kernel size. But it was theirs. Her grandfather had saved the seed every year. Her father had done the same. He'd taught her how. The best ears from the strongest stalks. That's the secret, Sarah. You save the best of what you have, and you plant it again. That summer, she planted 40 acres of it. It was all she could afford. The fields grew tall and green. The stalks were thicker than the hybrid corn on the neighboring farms. The ears were smaller, less perfect, but they were heavy in her hand, solid. The harvest came in late September. She drove the old combine herself. Her father had taught her how to fix it, how to listen to the engine, how to feel the rhythm of the machine. She filled one old grain truck, and then another. Her yield was lower than her neighbors, but her costs were almost nothing. She owned the seed. She didn't have to buy it from a corporation. That was the whole point, to be free of that cycle. She drove the first truck to the county co-op, the same co-op her father and grandfather had used. A long metal building with a towering grain elevator. The air smelled of dust and diesel. Frank Peterson ran the place. He'd run it for 30 years. Frank was a good man. He coached Little League. He was a deacon at his church. He had known Sarah since she was a little girl. He saw her truck pull onto the scales. He walked out of the office, wiping his hands on a rag. Sarah, good to see you. Sorry about your dad. He was a good man. Thank you, Frank. He looked at the truck. First load of the season? She nodded. Yes, sir. It's the Miller corn. Frank's smile tightened just a little. He knew the corn. He'd been telling her father for years to switch to a modern hybrid. Better yields, Tom. Guaranteed market price. But her father was stubborn. Frank sighed. All right, let's get a sample. Let's see what we've got. He climbed the side of the truck. He plunged a long metal probe into the grain. He pulled out a sample and carried it back to his office. Sarah waited by the truck. She watched other farmers pull in. Their trucks were newer, bigger. Their corn was bright yellow, perfectly uniform. Hers was a pale, creamy white. The kernels were all different sizes. 5 minutes passed, then 10. Frank came back out. He was holding a clipboard. He wasn't smiling anymore. He walked slow. His boots crunched on the gravel. He stopped in front of her. He wouldn't meet her eyes. He looked down at the clipboard. Sarah, I ran the tests. Moisture content is good, test weight is fine, but the starch and sugar profile, it's not in spec. What does that mean? It means it doesn't meet the standard for grade A sweet corn. It's too starchy, not sweet enough for the canneries, not uniform enough for the grocery chains. He finally looked at her. His eyes were full of something that looked like pity. I'm sorry, Sarah. It's feed grade. Feed grade. The words hung in the dusty air. Feed grade was the bottom. It was 90 cents a bushel. The market price for sweet corn was over $4. She had done the math 100 times. She needed at least $3 a bushel to pay the bank, to keep the farm. Frank saw the look on her face. Look, I can give you 95 cents, as a favor to your dad, but that's the best I can do. My hands are tied. The buyers have standards. I can't sell what they won't buy. He thought he was being kind. He genuinely believed he was helping her, protecting her from a bigger loss. He even offered advice. Next year, plant a DeKalb hybrid. I'll set you up with the seed rep. We'll get you back on your feet. He put a hand on her shoulder. Your dad was a great farmer, but sometimes the old ways, they just don't work anymore. Have you ever been told that? Have you ever been told you couldn't do something? Not by an enemy, but by a friend, by someone who genuinely believed they were protecting you. Certainty delivered with kindness. It's a quiet poison. It's more dangerous than anger, because you can't fight it. You can only disprove it. Drop a comment below and tell me about a time someone's certainty tried to define your limits. Because what Sarah did next wasn't about fighting Frank. It was about proving his definition was wrong. She looked at Frank. Her face was a blank mask. She didn't cry. She didn't argue. She just nodded. Okay, Frank. Thanks for your time. She got back in the truck. She started the engine. And she drove off the scales. She didn't dump her grain. She took it with her. Frank watched her go. He shook his head. He felt bad for her. A young girl, all alone, trying to make a go of it. He went back inside his office. He was certain he had done the right thing. Sarah drove home. The truck felt heavy. The 95 cents a bushel felt like a judgment, a final verdict on her family's legacy. Feed grade. She parked the truck in the barn. She went inside the house. Her mother, Mary, was at the kitchen table. She saw Sarah's face. She didn't have to ask what happened. She just poured a cup of coffee and waited. Sarah sat down. She stared at the yellow legal pad, at her father's handwriting. She told her mother what Frank had said. Feed grade. He said the old ways don't work anymore. Mary listened. She didn't say anything for a long time. She just stirred her coffee. The spoon made a soft clinking sound against the ceramic mug. Then she stood up. She walked over to an old wooden hutch in the corner. She opened a drawer. She pulled out a thick, leather-bound book, a ledger. It was her grandfather's. The cover was worn smooth. The pages were yellowed and brittle. She placed it on the table in front of Sarah. "Open it." Sarah opened the book. The pages were filled with her grandfather's elegant script: dates, weather conditions, planting notes, harvest yields. It was a history of the farm, a history of their corn. She turned the pages. 1955, 1962, 1971. Then she saw an entry from 1978. Her grandfather had written a note in the margin, a conversation he'd had with a seed salesman. The salesman had tried to get him to switch to a new hybrid, just like Frank. Underneath the entry, her grandfather had written something else. He wrote, "This corn isn't for the canneries. It's not for the grocers. It's not for eating. It's for drinking." Sarah read the line twice. "It's for drinking." She looked at her mother. Mary smiled a sad, knowing smile. "Your grandfather used to sell a little bit of it to old man Abernathy down the road. He had a still back in the woods, made whiskey. He always said our corn made the best he ever tasted. Said the starch was the secret. The starch, Frank said, was a flaw. The sweetness in corn makes for a harsh spirit, he'd say. But the starch, that makes it smooth." A revelation. A key turning in a lock she didn't even know was there. Her corn wasn't a failed food crop. It was a perfect distilling grain. Its value wasn't in its sweetness. It was in its substance. Frank Peterson wasn't wrong about the facts. He was just wrong about the story. He was trying to fit their corn into a box it was never meant to fill. Sarah closed the ledger. She felt something shift inside her. The despair was gone, replaced by a cold, clear purpose. She spent the next week on the computer, in the local library. She researched craft distillation. The industry was just starting to boom. Small distilleries were popping up everywhere. They were looking for unique ingredients, for heritage grains, for a story. She made a list. She called 10 of them. 9 of them said no. They had their suppliers. They used standard yellow corn. It was cheaper, easier. But the 10th one was different. A distillery in Columbus, an hour's drive away. It was called Watershed Spirits. The owner was a woman named Elena Ramirez. She had started it herself 2 years earlier, with a small business loan and a copper still she bought from Portugal. Sarah got her on the phone. She told her about the corn, the family history, the high starch content. She didn't mention Frank Peterson. She didn't mention the words feed grade. She just told the story of the grain. Elena was quiet on the other end of the line. When Sarah finished, there was a long pause. Sarah thought she'd hung up. Then Elena spoke. Her voice was low and intense. "Bring me a sample. Tomorrow." The next day, Sarah filled a 50-pound sack with her corn. She drove her old pickup truck to Columbus. The distillery was in a repurposed warehouse, in a part of the city that was still rough around the edges. The air inside smelled of yeast and warm grain. Elena was younger than Sarah had expected, maybe 30. She had sawdust in her hair and a focused intensity in her eyes. She didn't waste time with small talk. "Show me." Sarah opened the sack. Elena ran her hands through the corn. She picked up a few kernels. She studied them. She put one in her mouth and chewed it, thoughtfully. She walked over to a small grinder. She ground the kernels into a rough meal. She added hot water. She made a small, rudimentary mash. She tasted it. She closed her eyes. Sarah held her breath. Elena opened her eyes. She looked directly at Sarah. "How much do you have?" 2 truckloads, about 1,000 bushels. And how much do you want for it? This was the moment. Sarah thought of Frank's offer. 95 cents. She thought of the bank loan, the yellow legal pad. She took a breath. $6 a bushel. It was more than the market price for the best sweet corn. It was a gamble, a huge one. Elena didn't even blink. She just nodded. Done. I'll have a truck at your farm on Monday. She stuck out her hand. They shook on it. A deal made in a dusty warehouse, based on a taste, a story, and a belief in a different kind of value. Sarah drove home in a daze. $6 a bushel. It was more than enough. Enough to pay the bank. Enough to buy seed for next year. Enough to breathe. On Monday, the truck came. It wasn't a big semi like the ones at the co-op. It was a smaller, flatbed truck with the Watershed Spirits logo on the side. Sarah loaded the corn herself. As she drove the tractor back to the barn, she had to pass the main road, the road that led to the co-op. She saw a familiar pickup truck drive by, Frank Peterson's. He slowed down as he passed her farm. He saw the truck being loaded. He saw the corn, his corn, the feed-grade corn. He saw it heading east, toward the city, away from him, away from the system he represented. He frowned, confused. He kept driving. But the image stayed with him, and that was just the beginning. Because this is where the story gets bigger. This is where one woman's refusal to accept a label starts to change everything around her. Let me tell you about the next 15 years. The first year, Sarah planted all 40 acres with Miller corn. She sold every bushel to Elena. $6 a bushel. Cash. She paid off the operating loan. She bought a new disc harrow. Cash. The second year, the first batch of whiskey made from her corn was aging in barrels. Elena told her the spirit was different, smoother, more character. Sarah bought her fertilizer and diesel for the season. Cash. The third year, her neighbor's farm went up for sale. Old Man Hemlock was retiring. 50 acres. He was going to sell it to a developer. Sarah went to see him. She made him an offer. She bought the 50 acres. Cash. She now had 90 acres in production, all of it planted with Miller corn, all of it sold before it was even harvested, a standing contract with Watershed Spirits. The fourth year, the first bottles of Miller's Reserve hit the market. The label was simple, a drawing of her family's barn, and a short text. Made from 100% Miller heritage corn, a grain deemed unsuitable by industrial agriculture, but perfect for this bottle. It sold out in a month. Frank Peterson saw a bottle of it in the state liquor store. He read the label. He felt a strange knot in his stomach. It wasn't anger, not contempt, something softer, and in some ways worse. It was the feeling of a world he didn't understand, a world that was moving on without him. By the fifth year, Sarah had bought another 30 acres, 120 acres total, all paid for, cash. She hired her first full-time farmhand. She bought a brand new planter, a John Deere 1770 NT, cash. She drove it herself, past the co-op. She didn't wave. She didn't have to. The planter was its own statement. By the 10th year, Watershed Spirits was no longer a small startup. It was a major player in the craft scene. They had distribution in 20 states. Miller's Reserve was their flagship product. It won awards every year. Elena and Sarah were partners now, not just buyer and seller. They planned crop rotations together. They experimented with other heritage grains, rye, barley, spelt. Sarah's farm became an incubator, a laboratory for flavor. Other farmers started to notice. They'd stop by, ask questions. They saw her new equipment, her well-maintained fields. They saw her prospering while they were struggling, stuck in the commodity cycle, taking whatever price the co-op would give them. They started asking her for seed. At first, she gave it away. Then she started selling it.
She taught them how to grow it, how to save it.
She told them about Elena. She created her own co-op, an informal one based on a handshake and a shared belief that value wasn't determined by a test in a dusty office. By the 15th year, Sarah Miller was farming over 500 acres. She owned it all. No debt, no dependency, no asking for permission. Frank Peterson saw her picture in a farm journal, an article about heritage grains. She was standing in a field of her corn, smiling. She looked strong, confident. The article called her a pioneer, a visionary. It talked about the Miller-Ramirez Heritage Grain Initiative, a foundation she and Elena had started. It gave grants to farmers who wanted to switch from hybrids to heritage crops. Frank put the magazine down. He was retired now. The co-op had been sold to a large agribusiness conglomerate. It was just a number on a balance sheet. All the local character was gone. He spent his days in his workshop, tinkering with old engines. One afternoon, a young man knocked on his door, maybe 25 years old, the son of a farmer Frank knew. He was holding a small paper bag. "Mr. Peterson? My dad said you were the man to talk to." "About what?" The young man opened the bag. It was full of seed corn, creamy white kernels, irregular shapes. Miller corn. "I want to grow this. I have a chance to sell it to the Watershed Distillery, but I don't know how to price it. I don't know what it's worth. My dad said you knew this corn." Frank looked at the seed in the young man's hands, the same seed he had dismissed 20 years ago, the same seed he had called feed grade. He felt the full weight of those 2 decades, the weight of his own certainty. He had been so sure, so kind, so wrong. He looked past the young man, out the window, toward the Miller farm. He could see the top of Sarah's new grain silo, gleaming in the afternoon sun. He looked back at the young man, and in that moment, he finally understood. The most dangerous limitation is the one imposed by someone who genuinely believes they are protecting you. He could have destroyed her, not with malice, but with help, with his reasonable, logical, well-intentioned advice. His kindness was the weapon. Her refusal to accept it was her shield. He finally spoke. His voice was quiet, hollowed out. "Son, you're talking to the wrong man. I'm the last person you should ask about what that corn is worth." He pointed out the window. "You need to go talk to Sarah Miller. She knows what it's worth. She always did." That is the quiet witness, the doubter who watches from a distance, as the world they thought they knew is rebuilt by the very person they dismissed. There is a justice in that, a quiet, devastating justice. Proving someone wrong takes decades, not moments. Today, the Miller family farm is a model of regenerative agriculture. Sarah rotates her crops. She uses cover crops to build soil health. Her yields per acre are lower than the industrial farms, but her profits per acre are 3 times higher. Contrast math. It's the story of who was right. The foundation she started with Elena has helped over 50 family farms transition to heritage grains. They created a new economy, outside the old system. They built their own tables instead of asking for a seat at someone else's. The legacy. It's not just in the land, it's in the people. In the distillery in Columbus, there is a tasting room. It's beautiful, all reclaimed wood and polished copper. Behind the bar, in a climate-controlled glass case, sits an old, leather-bound book, the ledger, her grandfather's ledger. It's open to the page from 1978, the page where he wrote the words, "It's not for eating, it's for drinking." Tour guides point to it. They tell the story of the feed-grade corn that became a legend. Sometimes Sarah is there. She'll watch people read the passage. She sees the understanding dawn on their faces.
They get it. They understand that the story of the whiskey in their glass
Is a story about seeing value where no one else did. The physical artifact, the bridge between then and now. It's proof. Proof that the old ways sometimes do work. You just have to find a new way to use them. The story isn't about corn. It isn't even about whiskey. It's about the quiet, stubborn refusal to let someone else write your story, to let their definition of value become yours. Right now, somewhere in the world, a young person with a new idea is being told no. They're being told it's feed grade. They're being told it won't work. They're being told to switch to the hybrid, to follow the rules, to accept the price they're offered. And that advice is coming from a good person, a kind person, a person who is absolutely certain they are right. This story is for them. It's a reminder that the most powerful act of rebellion is not to argue, not to fight, but to go home, load your truck, and find someone who understands the story you're trying to tell. Self-sufficiency is the ultimate freedom. No debt, no dependency, no asking permission. Sarah Miller never went back to the co-op. She never confronted Frank Peterson. She never gloated. She didn't need to. Her farm was her argument. Her success was her rebuttal. Her legacy is the final word. The soil is enough. The seed is enough. The belief in your own work, when no one else has it, that has to be enough. If this story means something to you, if you've ever felt like your work was undervalued, share this with someone who needs to hear it, someone who is standing at a crossroads, someone who has just been told no. Because sometimes, a story is the one thing that can help you take that next step and prove the whole world wrong. Thank you for listening. Remember to subscribe. There are more stories to tell, so many more.